Thank you everyone for being here, and I would like to say good morning because we still have 10 minutes. And we would like to introduce a very vibrant speaker with us, Mr. Harsh Shah, today. I would like to first start with a big round of applause for all of you and for being here. So you have the energy high, and can we start again, please? Thank you so much. Okay. So Mr. Harsh Shah is here from Bombay, and I hope he had a safe travels. Thank you so much for being here. I would like to take a minute to introduce him. He is a qualified chartered accountant and a technical specialist in enterprise risk management. He's seasoned with 15 years of experience in risk management, audit, business consulting, and corporate. He's also an alumnus of IIM Bangalore and a member of various committees. So we do have his list of a lot of his good things, but I would like to pass it on to Harsh now because of the time, and I would give a big round of applause again for Mr. Harsh Shah, please.
Okay, very good morning to all of you. Thanks for choosing track B and being here. I'm going to kind of make this very interactive, hands-on, practical, because I don't want to bore you with a presentation and just do the random theories behind risk management. If you see what's happening around the world, Ukraine-Russia war, COVID pandemic, shortage of semiconductors, Pakistan, economy collapse, Citigroup faced with a huge fine due to risk management non-compliances. What I want to bring to the forefront of today's discussion is that we're entering a world of uncertainties, which is very clear, right? I think Romal also mentioned in his talk that the number of uncertainties we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years compared to what we saw 100 years as a timeline, things have drastically changed. And we as internal auditors, we as enterprise risk experts, we as business consultants, we as chief risk officers, we got to be agile. We got to be resilient. We got to be focused on what can go wrong before what can go right. And how can that happen? And I think the word dynamic is very important. While I'm going to be focusing a lot on enterprise risk management, but why dynamic? Why do you need to have a dynamic risk management process? So that's going to be the main theme of my talk. I've taken few news articles which are kind of cynical and negative in nature, but that just shows what's happening around the world again. We're not going to see chocolate after 2050. That's the prediction because the cocoa production, West Africa, the cocoa production is declining. And companies like Hershey's and Mondelez are kind of looking at alternative sourcing strategies because how will you then produce chocolate? If you look at the bursting glacial lakes, 15 million people are going to be at risk. If you talk about the financial impact of climate change, $1 trillion at a consolidated level. Cybercrime is going to cost about $10.5 trillion to the world annually. There was a survey in 2021, 76% Indian companies were actually hit by a cyber attack. And I was speaking to a few insurance companies. This is, of course, an unknown public data because no one wants to talk about the amount of ransom claims that they've got. But that has gone up by 37%. And this doesn't come out in the public, right? So when you look at cyber security, when you look at wars, when you look at the pandemic, when you look at health crisis, when you look at fake news, what we've seen with the Adani group, can those events be predicted? As a risk manager, we're not astrologers. As an internal auditor, we're not astrologers. A very funny instance, I was speaking to my UK counterpart, and there was a board meeting going on at one of the companies in the London. And the board wakes up and says to the CRO that, you're not doing a good job because your role is to really predict what's going to go wrong. And the CRO woke up and he said that I'm not an astrologer. I can't tell you for sure what can go wrong. But what I can tell you is where we can go wrong, how can we prepare ourselves better for an uncertain future using data analytics, predictive modeling, scenario planning, horizon scanning. All these are new age techniques of risk management which I want to leave with all of you. And my first question to this audience, we've got some learned professionals, we've got CIAs, CROs sitting here, but let's go back to the drawing board. What do you think of the word risk? Just speak up. Give me one word that comes to your mind when you think of risk. Anyone? Uncertainty, okay? Potential problem. Keep underlining problem, potential, uncertainty. Anyone? Opportunity. Thank you, ma'am. Sorry? Learning, okay? Returns. Anything negative? What do you think of risk? Just think about that one word that comes to your mind. And I did this survey with a group of chief executives a couple of months back. You'll be surprised to know almost 85% of them linked risk to a negative outcome. And which is the true mindset, right? We always think about risk as a negative connotation. If I go back to the ISO 31000 definition, risk is actually very simple. It's not strategy, it's not finance, it's not compliance, it's not negative outcome, nothing. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on your objective. All of us here have a personal objective, a professional objective. And in a similar setup, organizations have a corporate objective, right? If you know the corporate objective, I'm very sure you will know what are those events which will stop you from getting there. It's like an obstacle race. You know you want to get there, but you also know what are the obstacles you got to cross. And if we are able to understand that as a risk expert, as an auditor, trust me, the journey of risk management will be far more mature. You will think of risk as a culture and not a compliance. So risk is a combination of three words, like I said. It's effect, uncertainty, and objectives. Imagine a cement plant who wants to grow their production by X million ton 2025 or 2030. Now there can be a range of uncertain events which could be delays in land acquisition or inability to find the right raw materials at the right price or not being able to find the right talent to look at their plants. Gig economy, cyber attack on some of their servers, compliance issues, change in government policies. All these issues will start coming to your mind naturally when you think of risk is linked to an objective and not risk is just a negative outcome or risk is linked to just returns, right? So I just wanted to clear the fundamentals first. Now let's understand what is enterprise risk management. We are all very good with understanding risk management, but what is enterprise risk management? Anyone who wants to volunteer and just give me a sense of what do you think is ERM? Anyone who knows what is ERM, just yes, no? Okay, how many new to ERM? Raise your hands. Quite a few. Okay. Enterprise risk management according to the COSO definition, and I'm going to talk about these international frameworks in a bit. COSO is the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations. It comes under the Securities Exchange Commission. According to COSO, ERM is a process which is implemented by people. I'm just throwing emphasis on the key words of the ERM definition. It's processed by the people. COSO says ERM is not the role of the internal auditor. It's not the role of the chief risk officer. It's the role of the people, which means all of us here are supposed to be risk intelligent. We're supposed to be in a position to identify risk in our own function and kind of report that to every level. There is a Swiss-based company we were working with. They have invested crores of rupees in this real-time app. And what does this app do? Listen to the story. Every evening, the employees have to punch out their attendance, right? So they open the app. They punch out the attendance, but there is a pop-up. And it says, identify the risk event for the day. Till you put that, you're not allowed to check out. Which means the risk committee, the internal audit team, and the risk team are sitting on a bank and inventory of so many events across departments. Someone in marketing will say, we saw Twitter and Facebook open on an official laptop. Someone in sales will say, we have rising customer complaints, but no one is escalating it to the right team. Someone in legal will say unauthorized people are signing contracts without review. Someone in procurement will say we're buying materials from vendors who are not in the approved list. And that will feed in so many thoughts and ideas when you are doing risk assessment in a dynamic way. This is just one example, and you don't need to invest crores into an app. You can actually do the same exercise on Excel. Imagine you tell all your employees before leaving for the day, even if you start on a weekly basis, because daily might become too cumbersome for a small entity, start it on a weekly basis. Try and identify events across the enterprise. So ERM is actually a process by the people where you will identify events not just from the financial areas, but also look at geopolitical, technology, environmental, social governance. ESG is also a subset which comes within enterprise risk. And when you identify the events, what is the ultimate goal of enterprise risk management? It's to ensure that you have given assurance on the achievement of objectives. Assurance. That's where the role of the auditor and the risk officer comes. You are providing assurance that the company and the board can achieve their objectives because the ERM process is functioning fine. So the third line of defense will typically vet and validate that yes, the ERM process is implemented, there is a policy, it is being reviewed every quarter. And how does this whole ERM process work? That's something which again I'm going to run you through. One story which I want to share, how I got into risk at the age of 21 when I was into my consulting assignments. We were appointed by a global company to do a supplier risk audit. And the supplier was situated in China. So the first pushback we got from the Chinese supplier was that you are not allowed to conduct the audit as per the contract. So that was a big question mark because this supplier was contributing to almost 30-40% of the overall procurement. And then we went back to the global company that how have you made this contract? You should have added an element of surprise audits or at least permission to conduct an audit. Anyway, we broke through that and we reached China, my colleague and I. And then there were about 18, 19 Chinese executives. We were with a translator. They said, you have only 2 days. You make sure you finish the audit and you leave from here. There was a lot of arrogance. They didn't want us to do anything. We started with the 3rd floor. And of course, we inspected some of the machinery. We looked at some GRN, good receipt notes. We looked at the other contracts that they have with other companies. What's the quality of the materials, whether they have a QC department. We also inspected their server. They were using SAP at that time. While walking down on the 2nd floor, I saw some fresh paint. And then, you know, the forensic mind at a young age wakes up. You want to question what's going on. So through the translator, I asked that lady that why is there paint only on this floor? 3rd floor was fine. When we entered from the ground floor, everything looked pretty old. There was no renovation going on. So the response was, this is out of the scope. I mean, you cannot question why we are doing renovation. What I did was, there was a door and it says do not enter. So I just pushed it. And inside I saw almost 150 young children with a tape on their mouth. And that was a child labor issue. And this really happened. We came back, we had to leave from there, giving a green report. Like Romal said, you know, it's very, not Romal, Mr. Debashish said, sometimes as auditors, you are under the influence of how much fees is being paid and what's happening. So we have to be safe. We were in a foreign territory, not very pleasing environment. I didn't want to, take a risk. We flew back. We spoke to the global company. Within a day, they terminated the contract. And what I want to bring to the forefront here is zero tolerance to social governance and environmental issues. As an internal auditor, can you vet, can you assure that the companies that you're advising or consulting, or even within the ecosystem, if you are the CIA or you are the CRO, are you ensuring that you raise your voice and take it to the board fearlessly? You are not allowing anyone to stand against your value system, your ethos. And I'm going to talk about this personal ethics a little bit in the risk culture model, which I will present at the end. So enterprise risk management really is about looking at risks across the universe, not just financial risks. You look at this beautiful chart, it's part of the Institute of Risk Management and Cambridge University risk document. We call it the risk taxonomy. So many risk events, and it's scary. If I show this to I was speaking at a Ministry of MSME conference and they said, ये देख के कोई startup चालू नहीं होगा. But I said, as an entrepreneur, risk taking is anyway in your DNA. What we are trying to teach you is take a calculated risk. You take a controlled risk because promoters, business owners, their risk taking ability is so high, their risk appetite is so high, that they lose sight of how much risk they can take because passion is taking over. Passion greater than risk, right? But risk is always dangerous. So you got to take calculated risk. Gig economy, fake news, data theft, soil degradation, medical breakthroughs, all of these events. So when you are looking at risk-based audits, when you are looking at issues, make sure you're spotting events across the enterprise. And that's why ERM is becoming greater than the traditional risk management process. Some of the international standards, there is an IRM standard, professional standard on risk management, publicly available, you can download it. Then we have the ISO standard, which is 31,000, 2018. And COSO has released the 2004 framework. That was the first time they ever released the enterprise risk management framework. And now they have revised it in 2017. And I'll talk about what is being revised. This is the ISO 31,000. And if you draw your eyes to one word, dynamic. Dynamic is the fifth principle in the ISO 31,000 framework. That your risk management approach, your enterprise risk management process cannot be a cut, copy, paste. If a mining company is doing ERM, you cannot take that policy and apply it to a retail company. If you've looked at the RCM or risk register of an e-commerce company, you cannot apply that to a gaming company, just for example, right? So risk management has to be dynamic. It has to be relooked at every quarter, every 6 months. Look at the process of enterprise risk management. This is under clause 6 of the ISO 31,000. So it starts with the basic approach towards the scoping and criteria. What does that mean? You got to first identify what are the objectives of the company. Going back to the definition of risk we discussed, right? Risk is effect of uncertainty on objectives. So when you are looking at enterprise risk management, first align the goals. What is the goal of the risk process? What is the goal of the risk assignment? What is the goal of the company? And how will ERM help the company reach that goal? The second step will be risk identification. How do you identify risks? Is it a predictive modeling? Can you just sit in one room and say, this is the risk? No. There are different formal techniques. For example, there's something called as risk brainstorming. What certain companies do, who follow good governance, who are appreciative of whistleblowers, they would sit and call for an informal brainstorming session. I was speaking to a chief risk officer of a large multinational company. He says every month, as a CRO in the cafeteria between 6 to 7 p.m., he calls different random people from departments, and they just have a chai session. And in that session, he will throw certain issues on purpose, just to ignite that conversation. For example, you're sitting at the cafeteria, legal mein bahut problem chal raha hai. You just say this one statement and see the reactions from different verticals. If you are getting response positively, you got to go back and feed that into your risk register or somewhere start your investigation. Someone will say, vendors ka bahut problem hai. Raw material time pe nahi aa raha hai. Another example, you are planting a seed of complaint, right? And we all love complaining. So when you have these different departments voicing out their concerns, it becomes a platform for transparency and trust. Because now every employee will feel that we are being heard, our problems are being escalated at the right level. And this is not your HR type conversation, right? It's about real business problems which are often subdued. We had ran a risk culture survey when I was doing my consulting work for different companies. And in that risk culture survey, there was a very interesting question. Are your subordinates allowing you to take risk? And you'll be surprised to know 96% of those employees said no. So this stems from the fact that the risk culture doesn't flow well from the top. How do you expect someone to identify risk when the subordinates or the seniors are not promoting them? At every layer, the head of department, the junior executives, they need to be risk intelligent. They need to be told that when you are taking a decision while you are empowered, think about what can go wrong first and then think about what can go right. That's where they will all feel that yes, we are empowered and we are also now accountable. It's not just responsible. Accountability is important. And when you have that, trust me, as the audit head or an external auditor or a chief risk officer, you will have a multiple stakeholder buy-in. People will back you up suddenly. There will be so much respect for the role of risk management. So one example which I gave for risk identification is risk brainstorming. Second is we do risk interviews. What you can do as a chief internal auditor or even as an external risk consultant, if you're running your own CA firm, conduct risk interviews with different stakeholders. That can happen once in 6 months. What does that mean? Create a questionnaire. What do you want to ask someone who's heading projects? What do you want to ask someone who's looking after procurement? What do you want to ask someone who's looking after marketing? And when you go back to them having a one-on-one meeting, again, a lot of thoughts will open up. This is slightly reverse to what I said in a brainstorming, because brainstorming, maybe some people may not open up. But when you're doing one-on-one interviews, you will get a lot of food for thought. The third technique is, of course, your SWOT, PESTLE, different tools and techniques are available, fishbone diagram. You will figure out root cause analysis. So that's another way to do some kind of risk identification. The fourth, and very, very famous now and important, is scenario planning. Let's assume all of you are running Zomato, okay? And of course, this is a case study, so don't take me seriously. You all are running Zomato. And I tell you, 500 people are hospitalized because one of your delivery boy in a certain pin code has delivered food where there was a dead rat in the container. And this event has happened. What will be your reaction? This is exactly how scenario planning works in the boardroom. You are throwing hypothetical situations to see how the mind is reacting, how your organization is reacting. And if there is resilience, if there is preparedness, if there is agility, trust me, your response will be far better than a reaction. Otherwise, we go into reactive mode. Right? There's a crisis, the whole team runs into it, we're solving, but we forgot what's the root cause. And I threw this question in one of the workshops we were doing for an oil and gas company. We purposely took the example of Zomato because we wanted to see what the reaction was. And everyone said, oh, we will give an apology letter, we'll issue a statement in the media. I said, but why are you accepting the risk? When you are apologizing, you are accepting that it's a mistake. None of the 15, 20 people in that room who are all CXOs told me that we will go to the root cause. We will see why the dead rat came. Do we need to change the packaging? If the dead rat is in the main container of the bike, it's not inside the food. The food is a third-party food. Why do you need to rush into giving an apology? So the lesson is, of course, when we come to risk analysis and evaluation, do not go to conclusive responses. Don't jump into reactive mode. Go to the root cause. Identify what has gone wrong. Go to the detailed analysis through data, technology to see can there be something which needs to be repaired. Can we relook at the whole situation? There was one solution which someone gave us in another session, again linked to this risk event, is we will now partner with garages in every pin code and ensure that every Saturday there is a pest control done in a certain SOP or in a certain standardized manner. Just a simple example. Then we were doing another scenario planning exercise where imagine you are an app like a Nykaa, right? And you are listing products which are third-party products. They're not your products. Someone buys a skin moisturizer, and now there are 600, 800 people who've got permanent blisters on their nose. What will you do? You are not a manufacturer of that brand. It's a third-party product. You've not done R&D. You're not expected to do R&D. How will you deal with this? So again, do you have product liability insurance? In your terms and conditions on the website before people buy, have you clearly written that we do not accept claims around third-party products? Because that is the responsibility of our third-party vendors. You're purely a facilitation portal. You're just an aggregator, right? So these are the kind of scenarios that we end up discussing in the boardroom, and that will create a great platform for identifying emerging risks, not current risks. Your current risks are people, we all know about it. Known knowns. What I'm talking about is unknown unknowns. What you don't know, what you don't know. And when you want to know what you don't know, what you don't know, confusing, right? You need to do what can go wrong at every stage. The next step is risk treatment. So now once all these risks are identified, where do they go? They become a part of your risk register. There is a template available. It's on Google. It's on different portals. But a typical risk register will have risk type, source, root cause, impact, likelihood, and then there is a score. And that score comes from your risk appetite statement. What is a risk appetite? All of you have some appetite for food. Risk appetite in simple terms is the amount of risk an organization is willing to take. How much risk is an organization willing to take? Good companies, we were working on a project with an infra company in UAE. So they have set aside a risk appetite. Usually banks, financial institutions have this kind of a model. But the non-FS entities, they don't park aside or earmark funds for risk. This company actually did that. They said, okay, 1% of our net worth, that is the amount of risk we are willing to take. Which means, kal ye paisa wapas nahi aaya to we are fine. We are tolerant. And then from that risk appetite is where you try and score your risk. So the scoring of risk happens on two parameters, which is impact into likelihood. Impact is how much, and likelihood is how many times. So how much is how hard will this event hit us? And likelihood is how many times do you think this risk is going to occur? For example, delay in land acquisition. You're not going to acquire land every day, right? So the likelihood is going to be very low. Of course, I'm talking for a non-real estate company. And the impact could be very high because if you don't have the land, you can't set up a plant. You can't set up a plant, you can't produce. You don't produce, it's going to impact your project planning, your sales, and your longer term goal. So risk is impact into likelihood, and that scoring will then sit in the risk register, which you will take back to the board. So the top 5 risks, top 10 risks, how do you arrive at that? It comes from the prioritization. Let's talk about the COSO framework. So we had the IRM standard. We spoke about the ISO 31000. I spoke about dynamism. And COSO has revised the framework beautifully to cover the most important part, which is governance and culture, which was missing in 2004. And here is where I want all of you as internal auditors, as consultants, to start looking at governance and culture very strongly. Is risk only a compliance? Then raise that red flag. Don't let it pass. Let it be identified as an insight, not an issue, like Romal said. Raise it as an insight. Take it to the board that we do not have the right risk culture. You are just doing risk management for compliance. I studied the annual report of listed companies, 6,500 plus listed companies in India. So I picked up random samples and I went to their section of management discussion and analysis. And they always have this risk events which are reported to the investors. 80% of the companies that I picked up in my sample had the same risk events in the last 5 years. What does that show? That is a cue that risk in these companies is only a compliance. They're only doing it because it is required for reporting. Today, SEBI has mandated the top 1,000 listed companies to have a risk management committee. BRSR reporting has also become mandatory for the top 1,000 listed company. RBI has said that you need to have a chief risk officer. The role of enterprise risk management is getting more and more serious as we move into an uncertain environment, right? But the question is, if you continue to do risk management like this and don't focus on the dynamic part, then failure is there for sure. Because according to an S&P survey, the average lifespan of a company has dropped from 35 years to 12 years, especially when they don't focus on risk management and innovation. Which means your company's survival is going to be at risk if you don't look at enterprise risk management more seriously. Now, how I added an ERM perspective, I'm going to give you another 2-3 examples. I used to run a microfinance NBFC. So currently I'm the CEO of the India chapter of Institute of Risk Management. We're a professional body headquartered in UK. We provide ERM exams and certifications across the globe. But before this, I used to run a microfinance NBFC. What I realized is, so we had 25 branches. We were going to enter the state of Bihar. We were one of the last MFIs in the country, a small entrant. And we knew that we would be facing competition from a lot of players, whether it's Bandhan, Ujjivan, Swasti, Equitas, etc. I realized that the intent of my people is very critical. Because when you are in a high growth phase, and also you are in a business which involves money, you got to make sure the intent of the people is clear. And in a microfinance setup, you typically have a branch. Above a branch, there are 6 branches which report into a cluster, and then 6 clusters report to a region. So usually the branch interviews are conducted by my cluster or regional head. They would not have interacted with me as management. When we set up the branch in Bihar, what I did is, in regular clothes, I was just wearing a jeans and t-shirt, and I left for Bihar. The branch was at Muzaffarpur. And it was just the first 3-4 days of my branch staff. And I went there and I told them, मैं एक NGO से आया हूँ, मेरा NGO पटना में है. I have a database of 5,000 women borrowers who I can queue up tomorrow to take a loan from you. हमको बंधन से प्रपोजल आ गया है, उन्होंने इंटरेस्ट रेट 17.5% दिया है. And I knew this new MFI, which was started by me, was 24%. We could not reduce the interest rate because our cost of funds was very high. He said, but interest rate हमारा तो इससे कम नहीं होगा. I said, कोई बात नहीं, वो मेरा responsibility, वो NGO मेरे कंट्रोल में है. मैं वो महिला को बोलूँगा इधर से लोन लो तो इधर से ही लेंगे. And that's how MFI industry operates. You have these micro influencers, just like you have influencers on Instagram. So he said, okay, चलो आप बताइए कैसे कर सकते. He got very excited, and I could sense the spark. I said 3 conditions. The first one is 2% processing fee मैं लूँगा. Because I am originating the loan for you. आपका तो कुछ effort नहीं है. मैं सारों को एक मेले में बुलाऊंगा, खाना पीना दूंगा, आपका स्कीम बताऊंगा, then they will all come to your branch. My second condition is 200 out of these 5,000 borrowers will be ghost loans, which means I will be using the money and I will repay it through them. And my third condition is we are agreeing today that 1% of this portfolio will be defaulted. I am signing an agreement saying that NPA is agreed at 1%. He started scratching his head. And my fingers were crossed because he was my employee. I was doing a stress test. He said, मुझे अपने cluster head से बात करना है, region में बात करना है. Because 5,000, the ticket size was 25,000. So 5,000 into 25,000, it's a massive portfolio which will suddenly spring up from our branch. I said, no problem, I'm waiting here. 15 minutes he came back and he said, deal is done. And I came back to the head office. We fired the cluster head, regional head, and the branch head. Now the reason here, you may say I am not empathetic, I don't have EQ, you will raise the social risk against me, why are you firing people? It was very important to do this at the beginning of the branch setup. The intent of the people hired was not right. When I told my HR do a detailed background check, he was fired from a fellow competitor, that branch staff. What did I do? I didn't look at risk from a traditional mindset. This is not taught in any theory. This is what we call fraud drill. I applied the concept of fire drill to fraud drill. And then I was invited by one of the associations which runs these workshops for MFI companies that please talk about this concept. And following, this was in 2016-17, 10 other MFIs started a concept of fraud drill. Idea is that you need to look at risk out of the box. You need to look at risk-based solutions and strategies outside the box. And that's why, again, going back, a dynamic approach. Few other things we did in the microfinance, very simple examples. We were setting up branches. I purchased data from Sibyl, and this was an investment in data and technology. I purchased data to decide where I should open branches, because that data gave me insights on pin code wise NPA, pin code wise outstanding portfolio, pin code wise number of borrowers, which means I would not want to enter high exposure markets. If it is already so crowded, why should I spoil it further? It will even affect the other MFIs and NBFCs. So we explored areas where the borrowers were not tested. Not tested in a civil language would always be a -1 score. So we entered those regions. The second thing we did was, our EMI was typically 1,000 to 1,200 rupees. And when we were looking at all the regions we were operating in, I got random data of electricity bills. And then I just did an average calculation. I said, on an average, electricity bill is also 600, 700 rupees. What I told my team is, let's start working with the local electricity boards and get red flag triggers. Anytime there is a default on electricity bill, start collecting EMIs in advance, because I know that borrowers' liquidity is affected. These are different ways you look at data points, consolidate them, and try and fit them into risk solutions. So these were 2-3 examples which I wanted to share, that how, in spite of being in a financial services setup, in a microfinance setup, I looked at a very different approach towards risk management. This is what we call as qualitative risk assessment. Now, what I want to leave you with is 8 action points to build a dynamic risk management framework. Bold text, simple, nothing complicated. These are 8 tips which I want to leave with you. First one, change your ERM goals from preventive to strategy. Do not talk to your CRO, CIA, and if you are the CRO, then do not talk to your risk committee and board that, yes, risk is about a preventive strategy. No. You will become a no man, trust me. I have met so many different kind of organizations. Then the risk head is considered to be a no man. अरे ये हर चीज reject कर देता है. Start participating in the strategic discussion. Think about, okay, if this is the risk, what is the upside to this? If we are entering Japan as a market, yes, there are risks around that, but what is the upside? And what's the trade-off? Right? So change the ERM goal from preventive to strategy. Focus on agility and risk-based decision making, which means empower every person within the company to think about risk first, which means, again, what can go wrong? When a person is taking a decision, tell them, please think this is going wrong, then you will automatically think about how to do things in the right way. And it also involves communicating the risk appetite. Let the board roll out a formal statement that as a company, we have an appetite for this much risk. This is what we can do, this is what we can't do. Create a risk escalation matrix. And don't just do this as a one-time exercise where you roll it out, it's a policy sitting on some drive, some intranet. Have some measures to validate whether it's working. Don't even wait for the internal auditor to comment that your ERM process is good or bad. I think these are simple things where you can develop risk champions and implement risk-based decision making. Third one, which I spoke about, give priority to emerging risks and unknown unknowns. I know 2 FMCG companies who are currently getting some of their employees certified by IRM. They have created 2 risk registers. One risk register is for the current risk, and the second risk register only focuses on unknown unknowns. And they have created a separate heat map and separate risk appetite for unknown unknowns. Why? Because in the RMC meeting, they don't want external shocks to suddenly create a mistrust between the risk function and the RMC. The RMC should know that yes, we are vigilant. The risk team and internal audit team is vigilant. We are aware about the external environment. We've scanned the external scenario. And you can put in as many negative events as possible. A hostile takeover, which may not even happen to your company, but put it. Some research done by some research firm in USA, what has happened? Put that. Think of such events, go to the extreme. You may rate it low on probability, but at least it's a high impact event which is hitting your boardroom discussions. So unknown, I mean, it's absolutely unheard of. It's what you don't know, what you don't know. It's called a black swan, right? Uh, the COVID, again, it's argued it's a grey rhino because it happened 100 years back. And I mean, we had conducted a survey. 86% organizations said that pandemic was sitting in our risk register. 22% said we were prepared for it. So again, the point is, while it sits on your risk register and risk dashboard, the preparedness always falls. So I would not categorize COVID as an unknown. Yeah. Yes, I remember that. The situation would have been different. Yeah. It's not an example of an unknown. But if supposing the pandemic never happened, then COVID can be an unknown. I'm giving you an example of hostile takeover. If you're not a public listed company, but closely held, can hostile takeover affect you? So you're again visualizing and creating a very hypothetical situation. And go to the extreme, absolute worst case scenario is what we call it. And put those events into that risk register. Yeah. Yeah. Feb 2020. So this is what we call interconnected events. Because there is a risk which you've foreseen, you're already planning and creating a business continuity kind of a strategy. I don't want to give the name of the company, but one company in their risk register for unknown unknowns, they've written aliens coming down to Earth and taking over the human workforce. We don't know. Again, some people think unknown unknowns are absolute psychotic situations. How can you think about this? But even if one of those materializes, you will be happy as an auditor and risk function that I could at least visualize. And where will you get ideas for this? Read reports. Read the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report. It offers some great insights. We usually participate with them on various surveys. So read that report. You'll get a lot of insights. Eurasia, they have the top 20 geopolitical risks which are released every year. Read those reports. Even IRM, we publish risk predictions every year. We've just come out with the 2023 predictions. All of these reports are freely available. Someone sneezing in America can give you a cold. That's how interconnected the world is, right? So when you think of that, automatically you'll start thinking worst case analysis. Fourth, revisit your risk appetite periodically. Your financials change every year, and so your risk appetite should as well. You cannot sit on a risk appetite which is 2015 and that statement is just there in the risk policy. So the most important thing is the amount of risk you're willing to take, that needs to be revisited in line with the ethos, the culture, the philosophy, the board expectations, what the internal auditors want. Fifth, risk champions. We all talk about the risk team, audit team. Risk champions is becoming very important in organizations. What does that mean? You have to identify process owners who are not risk experts. They are business experts. A person sitting in supply chain, make him a risk champion. He is going to think about risk and also supply chain. He will be accountable for the entire supply chain from a risk perspective. He is wearing a dual hat. And that supply chain risk expert will talk to you as the risk officer, as the risk committee. And if there are 20 such risk champions from different departments, the maturity of risk thinking will significantly elevate. So create risk champions is my fifth point. Develop them. educate them, try and run workshops for them, make them feel involved in the journey. They should also think of risk as positive and not negative, and they will be your chain of command because they will go back to their junior team members and say, नहीं, ये नहीं कर सकते, या ये कर सकते. Not because the risk team has said it, he feels empowered and he knows he's accountable now. कुछ भी गलत हुआ मेरे सर पे आएगा, ये मत करो. So you have communicated and translated the whole risk appetite and the risk function onto that department. Got it? It will also serve, so few examples again. When we were advising one company, they said, हमारे risk register जब roll out करते हैं, these business teams don't respond. फिर हमको ही जाके सब भरना पड़ता है और हम सब theoretical risk डाल देते हैं. Why does this happen? You've not developed the champions. You've not got them involved into the process. Sixth, enhance the ERM process with data and analytics. There are so many tools available. Use your historic data. Use competitor data. We were working with one of the retail companies. You know, they said that one of the internal auditors came and said, why is your rent cost of showroom so high? What they did is they mapped the rental cost of all other 10 competitors in the market. They downloaded the balance sheet. They said these many showrooms, what is the average rent cost in the P&L? They just did a simple mathematics and they said, आपका rent cost तो बहुत ज़्यादा है, आप justify कीजिए. How can an internal auditor bring such conversations to the discussion or to the board? Very insightful, right? Versus just saying ये बराबर है, ये नहीं है, ये ठीक है. You've now used external data to counter back to this company that you can go into a cost reduction strategy. Have you looked at the right geographical locations? Why do you need to have a showroom in such a prominent place where your footfall is less than 20% of some other location where the rent is lower? So that entire cross analysis needs to be done. That's why start using data analytics in your ERM process. Seventh, very important to win the confidence and very difficult as well. How do you win the confidence of the board and the risk management committee? I think that can happen only through education, examples and case studies. Again, another company, I was speaking to the chief sustainability officer. He says, my board is least bothered about ESG. They're saying, हाँ ठीक है, rating करना है, BRSR आप template एक ले लो कोई Big Four से करवा लेंगे. Why? Why does this happen? The implications are not understood. We often fear to talk about the worst case situation that may happen of not doing this. I know the fines and penalties as per the regulatory mandates are not significantly high, but let's not make that a culture. Try and educate the board. Tell them there was a company in US or Switzerland and this happened, and if we don't do it, this can happen. I read about a case a few weeks back. There was a young guy, Gen Z, 22-year-old. He went to this Australian company to conduct an interview, to give an interview. And he was sitting in the lobby. He picked up a plastic water bottle to drink water. He left a post-it and he said, I will never join the company because you are using plastic bottles. I am committed to the environment. And he just left from there. Sounds very weird, but let me tell you, the newer generation is going to be focusing on all these things. They are environmentally conscious. And if we as organizations are not cognizant of this Gen Z trend, you will not be able to attract any kind of talent. Imagine he left the job, he doesn't want it, just because they are using plastic water bottles. So every activity that you do needs to go back to the drawing board and questioned. And you need to win the confidence of the board through these case studies, through these examples. And my last point is, build the risk culture. Be the contributor towards building the risk culture. Shape the risk culture. And what is risk culture? I'm going to leave you with this diagram and framework. This is called the IRM risk culture. It's again publicly available. We've released this guidance in 2012. Hardly any companies are following it even till today, which means there is a huge potential for you as auditors to question that, do you have a risk culture framework? And risk culture framework starts with personal predisposition to risk, which means how much risk is an individual willing to take. As an organization, have you assessed that? All the CIAs and chief risk officers in this group today, or even some of the internal auditors in this group, Have you ever gone back to the drawing board to see what your employees have as a personal risk appetite? Have you run a survey? You will be amazed to see the results. Someone sitting in sales will say my risk appetite is 10 lakh. Someone sitting in finance will say my risk appetite is 5,000. How do you bring all these different individuals together to achieve a common company goal? That's why the risk culture model talks about personal predisposition to risk. The second layer is called the personal ethics. Now imagine a person with a high risk appetite and low ethics. What will happen? Fraud. Right? He said it. High risk appetite, low ethics, fraud. That's why the risk culture model in the second bucket needs to assess the personal ethics. Run a survey, go back, run a survey in your company. Are you willing to bribe someone? Just see how many people say yes or no. Then change the question. Are you willing to bribe someone for the benefit of your company? Again, see yes, no. The whole dynamics will change. After you assess the personal ethics, you go to the behaviors. Behavior is what? A combination of this ethics and appetite will decide the attitude towards the company. We often question, right? Why aisa kyun hai? Why is he behaving like this? It comes from their ethics and appetite. And finally, organization culture is framed because of a combination of these three. And risk culture is the final silver line, where if you are able to target the personal appetite, the ethics, change the behavior, develop the right org culture, then risk culture will be successful. Which means every person in your company will look at risk-based decision making. Right? I'll leave you with this. Thank you very much for a patient hearing. In the interest of time, we won't be going into Q&A. I have the next speaker. Thank you very much.
As a token of appreciation, we would like to request sir to, just hand over to the speaker. And also, okay, some few words for Harsh.
Good afternoon. I think we had a wonderful session, Harsh. You gave a very good, your lecture gave an insight for the people to understand what risk means, the importance of it, and how we should practice it, most importantly. Because the maturity level in various organizations differ. And definitely there is a need to upskill all the people who are involved in that. From that point of view, I am sure it has given them a very good value. And hopefully when they go back, they will start practicing at least some of them. Thank you.